when you're saying that, and we had spoken earlier about this idea of recruitment, of causing African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, those who aren't in the majority, to have this negative image of themselves, which causes them to be less economically viable, which is a subtle form of slavery as well. Is that? Could you explain that a little bit?
I like the way you said that. Yeah, the subtle form of slavery. The major issue is on scarcity theory. All racism is built on the idea of scarcity. There's scarce resources around here, so you have to limit people's access to these resources. Now, theologically, there's no such thing as a scarcity, because grace is available to everybody and it's abundant. and so I love that concept. But it's the issue of scarcity. So when you have scarcity and you have limited human resources, physical resources, and those types of things in terms of material resources and all that, you have to limit the access to it. And so racism, economic slavery, and all like that, first of all, you have to have access to that. So you have to convince a certain group of people to go into certain kinds of work, and either to coerce them or force them in certain kind of work in order to produce those goods. Because so even though once you produce them, it's still scarce. It's not unlimited within that context. So you do have to stigmatize. You have to stigmatize people in terms of race, in terms of class, and gender, and sexual orientation. You have to stigmatize folk in order to keep them away, or at least to put them in a certain category, so that you'll always have workers as well as but you won't have the competition for the resources.
Okay.
And Wesley was very much aware of those kinds of issues.
It seemed to be.
Now,
in your context at the seminary, you would fundamentally you would say Christ is the answer for this issue, but in a certain you have to look at that dynamic between yourself and Christ. But let me ask you, economically, Wesley had this three-phrase sentence about capitalism: make as much as you can, save as much as you can, give as much as you can.
Exactly.
Was that his economic answer to those that would try to enslave others, either subtly or obviously? Was that his answer for the white majority, for others to say, listen, this is how you find happiness and joy. You don't need to do it on the backs of others. Is that his response?
Yeah. Well, he had two responses. I would think one would be the danger of riches, and that's really the ultimate issue. Is that if you lay for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth doth rot and thieves do break through and steal, and those types of things. If you lay your treasures on earth, that will kill your soul. Okay, and so that was very much an issue for him, killing the soul. So he was very much involved within that context. So that was the first level. The other level was his anger. And I think it's 1884. He wrote a treatise against slavery, and it was the most hard-hitting thing that I've ever read. That Wesley wrote, but it was really hard-hitting. And some people say he plagiarized within that context. There was a guy named Benezet, I guess, who was a person that did travel. There's no doubt about it that he drew on Benezet, particularly, and I guess the first two-thirds of the thing they did on slavery, treaties against slavery. There's no doubt he drew on, because it was a historical kind of thing and categorization, about history in England as well as in the United States. So that was very fascinating, within that context. But the latter third was where it was hard hitting. The rhetoric changed, and he was just really down hard on the slave owners, and as well as the slave traders, within that context. And he really was concerned about the damnation of their souls, because love of neighbor was very much a part of the salvation thing. It's prevenient grace, justifying grace, and then sanctifying grace. And he really, so if you really had a relationship with God through Jesus Christ and things like that, it ought to manifest itself. Okay, and so and of course, Wesley really believed that death is near. Death is near. That was that St. Wesley thing. I mean, Wesley's thing had to do with like Tillich, and death was real back in those days. And so you could die at any point, just like you can now. But the danger. And so he was fairly concerned about the souls, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Since we're speaking and we're going to be heard by AUC students as a whole, as a body, 8,000 students, what would you have to recommend Wesley to them? Why is Wesley important to them today?
Wow. Yeah, I'm doing some reading now. I just finished for the last couple of days a sermon on scriptural. What does he call that? Scriptural Christianity. That's what it is. But the whole issue of today, more than anything else, is how in the world do you get love, and how do you feel love? And his emphasis is on experience. Even formation is what Wesley's really involved with, and formation for him is really involvement in a community where you are loved and respected and cared for. Number one, by God through Jesus Christ, but secondly by others. And you cannot do that without those kinds of relationships. But also the experience of God.
Yeah.
That was extremely important to Wesley. Of course, the warming of his heart. His own Aldersgate experience and that kind of thing like that. Very, very important to him. And so it's the mystical experience that you can have with God, that's available to everyone, where you really feel your heart strangely warm, where you really experience God's love. That was there. So, and I think that's really what folks are after now, is their experience. If I could say what distinguishes churches that are growing and the churches that are not growing, is the experience of the direct experience of God's love in a mystical way, that I am cared for and I'm loved. Right?
Yeah. I felt the same thing. Okay. We're going to get a little bit off topic here because I'm interested to ask you about your prolific writer as well. This is not your first book, obviously. And if there was somebody out there that's interested in writing, what are some steps that you could give them? More than just put your seat in the chair and start typing. What would you say?
Yeah, I had no idea I could write. Oh, that's not true. That's not true. Even when I couldn't read. Okay.
And we're going to get to this story in a bit.
Yeah. But anyway, basically, I didn't like to talk a lot. I was a football player. Okay, and so I did a lot of action and those types of things like that. But even but when I did start writing, I found that I could put things in words,
right.
And so I began to develop that. I couldn't spell,
right?
So it's wonderful having the word, Microsoft Word, and all that stuff now. But anyway, I remember I would pick and choose words that I could actually spell to write stories and stuff like that. But basically, in college. I could write essays and I could express myself. And so through a process, like for example, I only wrote 2 papers in college. Okay, but when I went to seminary and I got married in my second year in seminary, and my wife is an outstanding editor, grammarian, and all that. And so basically, she would tear up my papers and then try to rewrite them. I used to, it makes me very, very angry, but I learned a lot. Within that context. And by the way, some people think she writes my book. Since when I wrote my dissertation, she didn't have anything to do with my dissertation, except that when I was having it typed, and she didn't like the way it was being typed because they didn't have computers back in those days. She went on and typed it. That's all she had to do. But basically, this it was in college. You had tutors.
Right.
Tutors for football players didn't do your work for you. They taught you how to think.
Right.
Okay, and so basically I was able to utilize people, the tutors, and to learn what I needed to learn. And so I got the knack of academic. Plus my parents were extremely well trained.
Right.
My dad had a Bachelor of Arts degree. He had what they call a Bachelor of Sacred Theology, which is the 7 year, 7 years to get to that point. And then he also had an MA. My mother's 1930 graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Ivy League School, and she went to the University of Pennsylvania when black people could not live on campus. So, but anyway, so the expectations were there. But when we get to the reading thing, I'll tell you a little bit more about what was going on with me. Yeah.
Because we're here at the Woodruff Library AUC, I'd like to know how, perhaps just in this book or in the others that you use, how have you utilize the library. How has the library helped you in your work?
I'll talk about this one. This is amazing. Most of my earlier books were like in pastoral care and pastoral counseling, and so basically you have textbooks and you are dialoguing with your colleagues that have written or people who are in the field. And so, if you didn't, and most of those resources would be in my own library within that regard. But when it came to this particular book, I had to have your help an awful lot because, Wesley's sermons, and, had to get access to Wesley's sermons, things that we're working on now, dissertations way back when, on microfilm, those kind of things. So, utilization of the library, very, very important, and and make sure you document it and everything. But access to journals now, too, that's very, very important.
Right.
Within that kind. Because even the ITC journal now, I guess is it ATLA?
Yep, ATLA. It's online.
Yeah, and so so now I used to have all the copies of the journals, and some of the ones that I want, I don't know what happened to them, but I had to go to ATLA. So I have to use you to remember what my code is to get into ATLA. Yeah.